Take the 40. That's all I'm offering." The man behind the counter didn't even look up when he said it. He was already reaching for the tag, already moving on to the next transaction in his head. That's how these places worked. You brought in something that meant everything to you, and the man behind the glass reduced it to a number in about 4 seconds flat. The customer at the counter didn't argue. He just nodded, slow and quiet, the way a man nods when he's already made peace with something he never wanted to do. His name was Otis Garvey, 61 years old, retired firefighter, 28 years with Station 9 in Memphis, Tennessee. The kind of man who'd carried 3 children out of a burning apartment building on Lamar Avenue back in 1998 and never once mentioned it at a dinner table. Not because he was modest, because he didn't think it needed saying. He was also, on this particular Tuesday morning in October, 7 weeks behind on his electric bill and 4 days away from having nothing left in his refrigerator but a half-empty jar of mustard and a box of baking soda. The thing he'd placed on the glass counter was a badge. Not just any badge. It was his retirement badge, the one the department gave you after 25 years of service, brass, heavier than it looked. His name was engraved on the back, Otis J. Garvey, Engine Company 9, 1991-2019. The chief had handed it to him personally at a ceremony in the station bay. There had been cake. His daughter had cried. His son-in-law had shaken his hand too hard and then pretended not to notice when Otis winced. He'd kept it on his nightstand for 5 years. Every morning he'd see it when he woke up, and every night he'd see it before he closed his eyes. It wasn't vanity. It was memory. It was proof that a man had spent the best years of his body doing something that mattered. Now he was in a pawn shop on Summer Avenue with a $40 offer sitting between them like an insult neither man wanted to name. "Okay," Otis said. "40's fine." He didn't say it like it was fine. He said it like a man who'd already used up his supply of fight on more important things. The bell above the door chimed. Otis didn't turn around. He was focused on the counter, on the transaction, on getting this done before his nerve broke, and he snatched the badge back and walked out with nothing but his pride and an empty stomach. Pride didn't keep the lights on. He'd learned that the hard way, and he was still learning it, apparently, at 61. The shop owner, a thick man named Paulson with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, had started writing up the ticket when the voice came from somewhere behind Otis. "Hold on." Not loud, not aggressive, just clear. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. Paulson looked up. Otis turned. The man standing inside the doorway was maybe 35, 36. Dark-skinned, medium build, wearing blue scrubs with a hospital ID badge clipped to the front pocket. He had the look of someone who'd just come off a long shift. Not tired exactly, but settled into himself the way people get when they've been running on purpose for hours, and the purpose has finally paused. His name was Kendrick Ashby. And he had not come to that pawn shop to rescue anyone. He'd come because his mother needed help. Specifically, his mother, Marvella Ashby, 73 years old, living alone in her house on Valentine Avenue, needed a new oxygen concentrator. Her insurance had declined the replacement twice. The appeals were going nowhere, and Kendrick had already used his savings on her last hospitalization. What he had left, what he'd come to convert into cash, was a watch, his father's watch. A Seiko his father had bought with his first real paycheck in 1979 and worn every day for 31 years until his hands got too shaky to work the clasp. Kendrick had been carrying it in his jacket pocket for 2 weeks, psyching himself up for this moment. He hadn't expected to walk in and see an old man trying to sell his retirement badge for $40. He stood there for a moment, just stood there. The kind of pause a person needs when the world asks them something they weren't prepared to answer. Paulson set down his pen. "You need something?" "That badge," Kendrick said, nodding toward the counter. "What's he getting for it?" "40, Paulson said. "What would you sell it for?" Paulson looked at Kendrick, then at Otis, then back at Kendrick. He had the weathered expression of a man who'd seen 1,000 variations of human desperation walk through his door, and he wasn't sure what category this one fell into yet. 65, Paulson said. Otis finally spoke. "Son, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm buying a badge," Kendrick said. He wasn't looking at Otis yet. He was pulling out his wallet. "Do you take cards?" "Cash only." Kendrick had $68 in his wallet. $68 he'd meant to use as part of the payment for his mother's oxygen concentrator. He counted it out on the counter. 5 10s, 3 5s, 3 1s, $68. He pushed 65 of it toward Paulson and left the rest. Only then did he look at Otis. Otis was staring at him with an expression that had several things in it at once. Confusion, something close to anger, and underneath both of those, something softer that he was working hard to keep off his face. "I don't need your charity," Otis said. His voice was steady. His hands, resting on the counter, were not. "It's not charity," Kendrick said. "It's yours. I'm just giving it back." He picked up the badge and held it out. Otis looked at it for a long moment. His own name, Otis J. Garvey, 28 years compressed into brass. "Why?" Otis said. And here's the thing about that question. It was a real one, not rhetorical, not a test. Otis Garvey genuinely wanted to know why a stranger in hospital scrubs had just spent $65. He clearly didn't have to recover a piece of metal that didn't belong to him. Kendrick didn't answer right away. He thought about it. Then he said, "My father was a mechanic, best one in his shop, for 30 years. You know what they paid him?" Otis said nothing. Less than the guys who'd been there half as long and fixed half as much. He never complained about it. Not once. He just kept coming in, kept doing the work. And when he retired, they gave him a card. A card and a handshake. Kendrick paused. "He deserved better than that. I think you probably did too. And I'm not going to stand here and watch you sell the one thing that proves otherwise." The shop was quiet. Paulson had gone very still behind his counter, which was unusual for Paulson. Otis took the badge from Kendrick's hand. His fingers closed around it. He looked down at it. He didn't speak for a while. When he looked up, there was no performance in his face. No attempt to seem unbothered. He was just a 61-year-old man holding something he'd almost let go of, and the feeling of it was more than he'd expected. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," Kendrick said. "Kendrick Ashby. You work at Regional?" Kendrick glanced down at his badge. "Trauma unit. Night shifts mostly." Otis nodded slowly. Then he said, "Your father, is he still?" "No, 3 years ago." Kendrick said it the way people say things that have settled. Not healed, exactly settled. "I'm sorry. Me too." There was a silence between them that wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that two people share when they've both lost something and they don't feel the need to explain it to each other. Then Otis looked at Kendrick's jacket pocket, at the small rectangular shape visible through the fabric. "What did you come here to sell?" he asked. Kendrick touched the pocket instinctively, the way you touch something you've been carrying for a while, protective without thinking about it. "A watch," he said. "Why?" Kendrick hesitated. Then he told him about Marvella, the oxygen concentrator, the insurance appeals, the math that didn't add up no matter how he worked it. Otis listened without interrupting. He had the quality, which is rarer than it sounds, of actually listening, not forming his response while the other person was still talking, but actually receiving what was being said. When Kendrick finished, Otis was quiet for a moment. Then he put his badge carefully in his jacket pocket. He squared himself toward Kendrick, the way men square themselves when they're about to say something direct. "How much does the concentrator cost?" "With delivery, about 420. How much you got?" Kendrick did the math out loud. What he'd started with, what he'd just spent, what he'd been able to scrape together from other places. "About 340. After today, 80 short. Give or take." Otis reached into his other pocket, not the one with the badge. The one on the left side of his jacket, where he'd been keeping a folded envelope since he left his apartment that morning. Inside the envelope was the cash he'd planned to use for groceries, $40. The same 40 he'd have gotten from Paulson. He held it out. "No," Kendrick said immediately. "Absolutely not." "You need that, son," Otis said, and there was something in the way he said it. Not condescending, not performative, just certain. "I have been needing things for a long time. I know how to figure it out. Your mother needs to breathe." "That's not something you figure out." Kendrick looked at the envelope. He looked at Otis. He had spent 8 years in a trauma unit, which meant he had spent 8 years watching people make the worst decisions of their lives under pressure, and occasionally, when the stars lined up just right, watching them make the best ones. He had learned to recognize the difference. It lived in the eyes. Otis's eyes were clear. Kendrick took the envelope. They stood there for a moment in that pawn shop on Summer Avenue, two men who had come in to give something away and were both leaving with something instead, though neither of them could have explained exactly what it was. Paulson, for his part, had found something very interesting to look at on his inventory clipboard. Outside, the sky had that flat gray look that Memphis gets in October, the kind of sky that can't decide between rain and cold and settles for both. Kendrick held the door open for Otis. Otis walked through without fanfare, the way men of a certain generation walk through doors, like it's just the next thing. They stood on the sidewalk. "Your mother's going to be all right," Otis said. It wasn't a question. "I know," Kendrick said. "She's stubborn." "Good. Stubborn is durable." Kendrick almost smiled. "Where are you parked?" "Walked. I'm about 6 blocks up." Kendrick looked at him. "I'll drive you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Kendrick was already turning toward his car. "You coming?" Otis looked at the space where Kendrick had been standing, and then at Kendrick himself, already walking, and he followed. There are things that don't make the news, things that don't trend, things that don't get recorded anywhere except in the memory of the 2 or 3 people who were present when they happened. Nobody photographed what went on in that pawn shop. Paulson didn't tell anyone about it, mainly because Paulson didn't talk to many people, and also because some things feel like they belong to the people who were in the room. Kendrick didn't post about it. He wasn't that kind of person. He drove Otis home, walked him to his door, and declined when Otis asked him if he wanted coffee. "I've got to get the rest of the money together before the supplier closes," Kendrick said. "You'll get there," Otis said, and here's where it gets complicated. Because Kendrick drove away thinking he was $40 closer to a solution and $80 short of having one. And that was true. The math was still hard. His mother still needed the machine. The insurance company still hadn't called back. But 2 days later, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. The man on the other end introduced himself as a man named Everhart. Not the insurance company, not a doctor, not anyone Kendrick had contacted. He was the owner of a medical supply company, and he'd heard through what he described only as a mutual acquaintance that there was a family in Memphis trying to get an oxygen concentrator covered that insurance kept denying. "Who told you?" Kendrick asked. "Someone who cares," Everhart said. "We have a program. Reduced cost for gap cases. I can get the unit to your mother by Thursday. The balance after the program discount would be $40. Kendrick sat in his car in the hospital parking lot with his phone against his ear and said nothing for a long moment. "Sir?" Everhart said. "Yeah," Kendrick said. "Yeah, I'm here. Thursday works." He hung up and sat there. He thought about Otis. He thought about the watch still in his jacket pocket, his father's watch, which he hadn't had to sell after all. He thought about a man who walked 6 blocks to a pawn shop to sell his retirement badge for $40 so he could buy groceries, and who gave those same $40 to a stranger's sick mother without blinking. He thought about how a thing like that moves through the world, quiet and underground like water finding its level. You can't see it happening. You'd never know to look for it, but it gets where it's going. Marvella Ashby got her oxygen concentrator on a Thursday morning in late October. She was sitting in her chair by the window when Kendrick brought it in and set it up. She watched him work, the way mothers watch their children do things. Not because they need to supervise, but because watching them is something they still haven't gotten tired of. "Who paid for this?" she asked. She had that quality, Marvella, of knowing when something had happened off the books. "A lot of people," Kendrick said. "What people?" Kendrick told her. He told her about the pawn shop and the badge and the $40 and the watch he hadn't had to sell. He told her about Otis Garvey, 28 years at Station 9, 3 kids carried out of a burning building on Lamar Avenue, who walked 6 blocks in October to sell the last proof he had that his life had mattered. Marvella was quiet for a while. The concentrator hummed between them, doing its small and necessary work. Then she said, "What's his phone number?" "Mama Kendrick." She looked at him. "What is his phone number?" Kendrick found it. He'd saved it without thinking about it after he'd dropped Otis off, the way you save a number when you have a feeling you might need it again. He handed her the phone. Marvella called Otis Garvey on a Thursday afternoon in October. He picked up on the 3rd ring. She talked to him for 45 minutes. Kendricks sat in the kitchen and drank bad coffee and listened to his mother laugh. Actually laugh, the full kind, the kind she hadn't done since his father passed, and he thought about his father's watch in his jacket pocket and about what his father would have made of all this. He thought his father would have said something simple. Something like, "See? The world's not done with you yet." The oxygen concentrator sat in the corner of the room and did what it was supposed to do, which was keep Marvella Ashby breathing, which was the only thing that mattered. Otis Garvey had his badge back on his nightstand by Friday morning. He saw it when he woke up. He saw it before he closed his eyes that night. The lights in his apartment were still off. That problem hadn't gone away. But problems that haven't gone away are different from problems that feel like the end. Otis knew the difference. He'd known it for a long time. He'd just temporarily forgotten. He remembered now. Somewhere across town, Kendrick Ashby was starting his shift in the trauma unit, badge clipped to his chest, moving through a hallway with the particular focus of someone who has learned that the work in front of you is the only thing you can actually do, that the distance between where you are and where someone needs help is just a series of steps. And you take them. You don't look away. You don't wait to feel ready. You just take the steps.